She was just mopping the hangar floor, yellow buckets squeaking beside her, coveralls faded from too many wash cycles, gray hair pulled back in a tie that had seen better decades until a Marine walked over and asked permission to speak, didn't demand it, didn't assume it, asked for it on one knee. And in that moment, every joke died in the air, every smirk froze, every assumption cracked like old concrete, because when a gunnery sergeant drops to one knee in front of the woman you've been calling grandma all week, you realize you might have missed something important. Now, before we show you exactly how that unfolded, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because this is one of those stories that'll change how you see the quiet people around you here on Graceful Valor Stories. You know that smell that hits you when you walk into an aircraft hangar? It's not just jet fuel, though. There's plenty of that. It's hot metal and hydraulic fluid, concrete, dust hanging in the air like fog, and something else you can't quite place. Maybe it's the weight of all the missions that launched from places like this. Or maybe it's just decades of sweat and determination soaked into every surface. The hangar at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point had that smell times 10. Overhead lights buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows between the rows of equipment. Forklifts beeped their way around cargo pallets while the distant silhouette of an FA-18 Hornet sat under its tarp like a sleeping giant. And there, moving through it all like she was part of the infrastructure, was Reagan Yates. Her yellow mop bucket had one squeaky wheel that announced her presence about 30 seconds before she arrived anywhere. Faded coveralls that might have been navy blue once upon a time, sleeves rolled, up just enough to show weathered forearms. Her hair, more gray than black now, was pulled back in a low ponytail that exposed the kind of neck you get from years of looking down at your work instead of up at the people ignoring you. She wasn't hunched over, wasn't moving slow, just steady, methodical. The way you move when you've learned that doing something right the first time saves everyone trouble later. A junior aviation recruit zipped past, pulling a toolbox on wheels that was going too fast and cutting too close. The corner caught her freshly mopped area and left a muddy arc across the clean floor. He didn't look back. She didn't call out. Just twisted the mop handle, squeezed out the dirty water, and started over. Jesus, one of the techs muttered from behind a row of cargo crates. Did they hire somebody's grandmother for janitorial duty? Reagan's face didn't change. She dipped the mop, wrung it out in long, practiced motions, and kept working. Another voice jumped in, younger, eager to get a laugh. Bet she was around for the first Gulf War. Probably mopped Saddam's bunker after we cleared it out. A few chuckles echoed off the steel beams. Reagan paused just long enough to move a safety cone before a forklift operator backed into her section. The guy didn't even see her, just the cone, and adjusted his path accordingly. She went back to mopping like nothing had happened. That's when you noticed how she moved, not random, not wandering around with a mop, hoping for the best. She had a pattern, a system, the way she positioned herself, the way she tracked foot traffic and equipment movement, like she was reading the flow of the entire hangar and staying 2 steps ahead of it. At the far end of Bay 3, a cargo crane started swinging a crate toward the loading zone. Too low, too fast. Reagan didn't shout a warning, or wave her arms. She just stepped forward and nudged her mop bucket exactly 2 feet to the left. 10 seconds later, the crate settled in the exact spot where her bucket had been. One of the watching techs frowned. Another kept eating his energy bar, barely interested. Think she's mute? Someone said. I haven't heard her say a word all week. She's just part of the scenery, man. Another replied, like a really slow robot. Ever wonder what secrets hide behind a mop and bucket? Stick with us. The revelation will leave you speechless, here on Graceful Valor Stories. Reagan worked her way toward the drainage line, wringing out the mop with the kind of efficiency that comes from muscle memory. Her eyes, pale blue like winter sky, tracked every person, every piece of equipment, every potential problem in her sector, as if somewhere behind those eyes was a different job, a different kind of awareness, one she'd never quite turned off. The hangar hit its loudest point around 9:30 when the morning crew took their break and the logistics staff dragged folding chairs up to the catwalk wall. That's when the jokes started bouncing off the steel beams like ricochets and everyone got a little louder, a little brasher. Reagan was rinsing her mop in the corner when a cluster of techs settled in with their coffee and protein bars, already looking for entertainment. "Hey," one of them called out, pointing in her direction. "You missed a spot over there," Reagan kept rinsing. "Probably needs reading glasses," another one said, unwrapping a granola bar. "Or maybe we should get her one of those robot vacuums. At least those don't need hip surgery." Laughter bounced around the group. A tech who couldn't have been more than 20 threw in his contribution. Let her mark her territory. "It's how animals do it, right? Circle around the same area until everyone knows it's yours." "God, what if she's been here since Vietnam or something?" "She's not that old," someone corrected. "Maybe Desert Storm, Persian Gulf, if we're being generous." Reagan didn't react. She adjusted the mop handle with a quick twist of her wrist and headed toward the freight tracks where dust liked to collect under the rails. Same rhythm she'd been using all morning. 2 strokes forward, 1 back, pivot, press forward again. A new voice cut through the noise. Female, uncertain. A recruit from the sound of it. "Maybe we should ease up a little. She's just trying to do her job." The tech who'd started the conversation turned toward her. "You want to end up pushing a mop too? Because that attitude's how you end up pushing a mop." More laughter. The young woman, her name tape read Martinez, looked down, embarrassed. Reagan worked her way along the edge of a crate marked "No Parking Hydraulic Line" below. 2 loaders had parked right beside it anyway, creating a narrow gap she had to navigate. But as she approached, she noticed something the drivers hadn't. Hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the junction box. Not much, just enough to create a slip hazard when someone inevitably stepped in it. She positioned her mop bucket to block the area and started cleaning it up. "Look at that." One of the crew said, "She's got opinions about our parking now." "What's next? Safety lectures? Maybe she'll start telling war stories from Korea." "Honestly, I'm wondering how someone that old even got security clearance for this place. She's not cleared for anything important." Another guy said, "She's basically a mop with legs, probably flunked out of some community college janitorial program." Reagan stopped for exactly 1 beat. Then she walked over to a control panel on the side of an autoloader that had been flashing yellow all morning. She studied it for a moment, noting the error code, then adjusted a single dial and depressed a reset sequence that wasn't in any manual the techs had read. The machine clicked once, ran through its calibration sequence, and the warning light turned green. The tech who'd been fighting with that same machine for 2 hours looked up confused. "Wait, how did she touched something?" another asked. "Probably short-circuited it with her ancient witch powers," someone joked. But Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the shift supervisor, had been watching from across the bay. He'd seen the tech struggle with that loader all week, seen 3 different maintenance requests get filed and ignored. And now the old woman with the mop had fixed it in 30 seconds. He walked over to the control panel and checked the diagnostic display. Everything was running optimal, better than it had in months. Reagan stepped back to her mop bucket, wiped her hands on a clean rag, and went back to work. No expression, no acknowledgement. Her movements were precise, not hurried, every step calculated. Her equipment clean and organized. Rodriguez lingered for a moment, studying her. Then he pulled out his phone and took a picture of the error code history. Something to think about later. One of the guys started miming, pushing a walker. Another cupped his hands around his eyes like binoculars. "Careful, everyone. Don't scare the resident museum exhibit." Martinez, the female recruit who'd tried to defend her earlier, shifted uncomfortably. She wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. A base civilian supervisor walked through, nodded to the work crew, didn't even glance at Reagan. "Business as usual." "Bet she writes letters by hand," someone said, like with actual cursive. 2 are cats. Old people love cats and cursive. What if she's somebody's mom? one of them whispered. Or grandmother. That's kind of messed up, her having to do this. You think she even knows what half this equipment does? That's when Reagan finally looked up. I do, she said quietly. I also know what happens when it ails at 30,000 feet. You learn things when you clean up the aftermath. It wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but it cut through the noise like a blade. The tech who'd made the cat comment stared at her, mouth slightly open. What? Reagan turned back to her work. 2 strokes forward, 1 back. Press, pivot. The crew was quieter now, but not out of respect. Just recalibrating, processing like she wasn't background noise anymore. She was something they couldn't quite categorize. And across the hangar, someone else had been listening. That afternoon brought a hydraulic leak in Bay 2 that had 3 different maintenance teams scratching their heads. The leak wasn't where it should be, not in any of the obvious places. Fluid was pooling near the landing gear strut, but the seals all looked good. The pumps were running clean. The filters were new. Reagan was working 20 feet away when she heard the conversation. Could be a hairline crack in the main cylinder, one of the techs was saying. But we need to pull the whole assembly to check. That's a 6-hour job, another replied, and we need this bird ready for morning flight ops. Maybe it's pressure relief valve. Already checked. It's fine. Reagan continued mopping, but her eyes drifted toward the aircraft. She'd seen this before. The way the fluid was spreading, the color of it under the lights. Not a seal failure, not a pump issue. She finished her section and started working her way toward the problem. Casual, unhurried, just following her normal cleaning pattern. When she got close enough, she could see what they'd missed. A service panel 20 feet above the leak, barely visible, unless you knew exactly where to look. The access port cover was loose, probably vibrated free during the last flight. Hydraulic fluid was dripping down the inside of the fuselage and pooling at the lowest point. She glanced around. No one was watching her. The maintenance crew was still debating whether to ground the aircraft. Reagan positioned her mop bucket directly under the leak and walked away. 10 minutes later, when the crew chief happened to look up while moving a ladder, he spotted the loose panel immediately. There, he called out. Secondary access port. Somebody hand me a torque wrench. The fix took 5 minutes. One of the techs looked around. How did we miss that? Another shrugged. Sometimes you need a different angle. None of them noticed Reagan Yates, 30 feet away, wringing out her mop with the faintest hint of satisfaction on her weathered face. But Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed. He'd been watching since the loader incident. And now he'd seen her position that bucket exactly where it needed to be to spot the real problem. That evening, after the day shift had cleared out, Rodriguez sat in his office with Reagan's personnel file pulled up on his computer. What he found made him lean back in his chair and stare at the screen for a long time. Civilian contract cleaner, 3 years on station, security clearance, basic support level. But buried in the file notes was something else. A single line that made his blood run cold. Prior service record classified. SOTB designation. No contact authorization required. SOTB. He'd heard whispers about that designation. Special Operations Team. Black. Units that didn't officially exist. Operations that never happened. Rodriguez tried to access more details and hit a wall. His clearance level wasn't high enough, but what he could see told him enough. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A friend from his deployment days who'd moved up to intelligence. Hey Marcus, it's Rodriguez. I need a favor. What can you tell me about SOTB designations? The line went quiet for a long moment. Where did you hear that term? I've got someone on my base with that in her file. Jesus, Rodriguez, don't dig into that. Seriously, those people, they did things that kept the rest of us alive, and the price was that they never existed. Leave it alone. The call ended abruptly. Rodriguez stared at his computer screen, then at the hangar floor below, where Reagan's mop bucket sat in its usual corner. The old woman with the mop bucket had once been something else entirely, something the military didn't want people to know about. The east door opened with a pneumatic hiss, letting in a gust of North Carolina heat and the kind of presence that makes conversations stop mid-sentence. You didn't need to see who it was. The change in energy told you everything. Gunnery Sergeant Miles Carter had that effect on rooms. His utilities were crisp but sun-faded, the kind of wear that comes from real deployments, not parade grounds. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his eyebrow, and he moved with the kind of posture that wasn't for show. Shoulders back, boots hitting the ground with purpose, eyes already scanning the hangar like he was assessing threats and resources in real time. The laughter around Reagan's section died like someone had flipped a switch. Gunny Carter, one of the logistics NCOs, straightened up immediately. "Sir, back from Jacksonville already?" Another called out. "Quick debrief," Carter replied, his voice carrying that particular kind of authority that comes from years of being the guy other people depend on. "Stop by before heading upstairs." He didn't pause for small talk. His eyes swept the hangar. Equipment placement, crew positions, safety protocols, the kind of assessment that happens automatically when you've been responsible for people's lives. And then his gaze found Reagan Yates. She was working. G near the rear landing gear of the covered Hornet. Mop moving in those same steady strokes. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the change in atmosphere. But Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. Something about the way she moved, the precision of it, the awareness of her surroundings that most civilians didn't have. He'd seen that kind of movement before in places that didn't show up on maps. Carter watched her for 5 full seconds, his mind working through possibilities. Then he started walking toward her. The techs who'd been making jokes went silent. One leaned against a tool cart, suddenly unsure whether to look busy or stand at attention. Carter's steps were slow, deliberate, echoing off the concrete. Every footfall was heard, the kind of movement that draws attention without demanding it. Reagan finished her pass along the aircraft's perimeter and took a step back, controlled, precise, creating a clear path without ever looking up. It was the smallest movement, but it told Carter everything he needed to know. She knew he was coming. She knew exactly where he was and what he represented. That was training, not instinct. He stopped 3 feet away from her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Carter did something that made the entire hangar hold its breath. He took a step back, lowered himself to one knee. No ceremony, no announcement, just a clear, practiced movement that belonged at memorial services, not aircraft hangars. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Gunnery Sergeant Miles Carter, may I have permission to speak?" You could have heard a wrench drop in Bay 5. One of the younger techs whispered, "Did he just permission to speak?" Another breathed, "What the hell is happening?" Reagan's pale blue eyes finally came up. Calm, unsurprised. She studied his face for exactly 2 seconds, noting the scar, the posture, the way he held himself, then gave a single nod. "Go ahead." Carter stood slowly, shoulders squared. "We crossed paths once, he said, his voice pitched for her but audible to anyone listening. "Operation Sandvice, Western Sector. I was running security for a medevac team. When we lost comms, took incoming near the perimeter wall." Reagan nodded once but said nothing. We were pinned down for 6 hours," Carter continued, his voice carrying the weight of that memory. "No radio contact, no backup. Wounded Marines who needed immediate evac. Command had written us off. Too hot. Too much risk for a rescue bird." He paused, studying her face. Then someone with clearance I didn't even know existed, rerouted a black air transport through hostile territory. Changed the entire flight pattern in real time. Used satellite intel to thread that bird through surface-to-air coverage like it was a training exercise. Got us out 30 seconds before the second barrage hit. That route saved 12 Marines. One of them was me. The silence in the hangar felt thick enough to touch. "I didn't know your name then," he said, "but I saw the routing signature in the after-action reports. I tracked it down later. Yates. Reagan Yates." A logistics corporal somewhere behind them murmured, "Wait, her?" Someone else whispered. "Sandvice is still classified. Most of those files are redacted. Martinez, the young recruit who'd tried to defend Reagan earlier, felt her stomach drop. She'd been watching this woman get mocked all week. And now Carter's voice got harder, more focused. He turned slightly to address the gathering crowd. She wasn't logistics. Not the kind, naval combat rescue coordination, embedded routing specialist. She didn't just move supplies. She moved entire operations around battlefields in real time. He looked back at Reagan. And now she mops your floors. One of the mocking techs tried to blend into the background behind an equipment cart. Carter reached into his chest pocket and pulled out something wrapped in plastic. A unit patch, creased but carefully preserved. It read, Vengeance 32. Below that, her maps, our boots. Reagan took it without hesitation. Didn't smile. Didn't get emotional. Just nodded once like she was acknowledging mission completion. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who'd been watching from his office window, came down to the hangar floor. He approached Carter carefully, respectfully. Gunny, he said quietly. I've been trying to access her service record. Everything's classified above my level. Carter glanced at him. That's because what she did officially never happened. Black air routing, real-time combat adjustments using satellite intel and encrypted channels, the kind of work that kept people like me alive. Rodriguez felt pieces clicking into place. The loader repair, the hydraulic leak, the way she moved through the hangar like she was reading patterns no one else could see. She's still doing it, he realized, reading the situation, staying ahead of problems. Carter nodded. Old habits. The hangar stayed frozen for another beat. Then, as if someone had broken a spell, activity started returning, but different, quieter, more careful. Carter wasn't done. Most of you don't know what Tier 1 routing means, he said, glancing at the wide-eyed faces around them. You're not supposed to. It's classified for good reason. But some of the missions you've heard about, the ones that didn't end in flag-draped coffins, they only succeeded because someone like her was behind a terminal making decisions nobody else had the clearance to make. Someone in the back whispered, that's why they redesigned the comm protocols after San Vice. Carter ignored it. C'est. He didn't get medals, didn't get parade routes or promotion ceremonies. You know what she got? He gestured toward the mop bucket. This. The silence had weight now, not empty, charged. Reagan finally spoke. I didn't want a parade, she said, her voice carrying decades of certainty. I wanted my people home. That's all. When I couldn't coordinate their movements anymore, I found other ways to serve. Martinez stepped forward, visibly shaken. Ma'am, I'm sorry. We didn't know. Reagan held up a hand, not harsh, just firm. There's nothing to apologize for. Not yet. Carter looked up toward the supervisor's office on the second level. A civilian manager in khakis stood frozen at the window, watching everything unfold. Don't worry, Carter called up. She doesn't need your apology either. Rodriguez had his phone out, typing rapidly. Gunny, I need to report this. There are protocols. There are, Carter agreed, and they all say to leave her alone. She's earned her quiet. Carter reached into another pocket and pulled out something else, a scorched flight tag with the Vengeance 32 unit symbol. It had obviously been clipped to combat gear during deployment. He handed it to her. This survived the extraction, he said, because of what you did. She took it, studied it for a moment, then looked back at him. How many made it home? She asked quietly. All of us, Carter said. Every single one. For the first time since he'd knelt down, Reagan Yates smiled. Just barely, just enough. Good, she said. Not one of the techs who'd been mocking her said a word, because in that moment the hangar didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the woman they dismissed and the Marine who knew better. By noon, the hangar had found its rhythm again, but everything was different. Forklifts still moved cargo. Wrenches still hooed from the maintenance pits. The overhead lights still hummed their mechanical song. But the space around Reagan Yates had changed. She didn't walk differently, didn't carry herself higher or demand more room. but the people around her moved with new awareness. Where before they'd cut through her path, now they gave her space. Where before they'd ignored her completely, now they watched respectfully, quietly. One of the younger techs, the same one who joked about her needing reading glasses, approached with something in his hands, an unopened water bottle. He hesitated like a kid approaching a teacher after class, then held it out. Reagan looked at it. Not suspicious, not superior, just considering. "Thanks," she said, taking it. He managed an awkward smile. I didn't understand before." "You still don't," she said gently. "But now you know you don't." "That's better." Behind him, other small changes were happening. Someone had moved a toolbox that would have blocked her usual path. Another tech coiled up an extension cord she would have had to step over. A third quietly repositioned a rolling cart that had been parked too close to her work area. Martinez approached more carefully, her face still red with embarrassment. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I should have spoken up stronger when they were—" "You spoke up," Reagan interrupted. "That took courage. The rest takes time." "I don't understand why you're here," Martinez said. "Why you're doing this instead of what?" "Sitting behind a desk, taking credit for other people's work." Reagan shook her head. "This is honest work. It keeps me close to the mission, and it reminds me why the mission matters." She gestured toward the covered aircraft nearby. "Every pilot who climbs into one of these goes out knowing their equipment works. Their comms are clear. Their support is solid. That's what matters, not who gets the credit." Reagan looked back at Martinez. "Besides, someone has to make C. You're the small things don't become big problems. A loose hydraulic fitting, a miscalibrated loader, a safety hazard, nobody notices. Those things can kill people just as sure as enemy fire. I've seen it happen." Martinez nodded slowly, understanding something she couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't announced, just awareness earned through truth instead of demanded through rank. Up on the catwalk, the civilian manager had disappeared from his window. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was back in his office making phone calls to people who wouldn't give him answers. Near the west wall, Gunnery Sergeant Carter was finishing a quiet conversation with the floor operations chief. When he turned to leave, he didn't offer salutes or handshakes, he just walked back toward the main hangar path. As he passed the group of techs, he paused, looked each of them in the eye. One dropped his gaze. Carter waited until he looked back up. "One day, if you're lucky," he said quietly, "you'll carry a fraction of what she has. Until then, keep your mouth shut and your eyes open." Nobody argued. Nobody even nodded. They just stood there processing. Carter didn't look back. He passed Reagan one final time, slowing for just a moment. "Permission to speak again?" he asked quietly enough that only she could hear. The faintest smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Granted, next time I'm at headquarters," he said. I'll make sure your name goes where it belongs, quietly, where it matters." Reagan didn't answer. She didn't need to. The gunnery sergeant touched his temple in a brief, respectful gesture and walked out through the same door he'd entered. Reagan turned back to her mop and bucket. Same rhythm, same quiet efficiency, but this time the hangar moved around her differently. Not just stepping aside, making space, not just out watching, understanding. And in the echo of steel and concrete where mockery used to bounce off the walls, there was something that sounded a lot like respect. The next morning, when Reagan arrived for her shift, she found something waiting by her supply closet. A small bronze plaque, no bigger than a name tag, mounted on a simple wooden base. It read, "Some maps save more lives than medals." No signature, no unit designation, no official authorization. But the message was clear enough. Reagan studied it for a moment, then placed it on the shelf next to her cleaning supplies. Not prominently displayed, just there where she could see it while she worked, because that's all she'd ever wanted. Not recognition, not praise, just the knowledge that the work mattered, and that someone remembered why. Have you ever watched someone carry more than anyone gave them credit for? Do you think real strength gets louder when nobody's looking, or quieter? And if a Marine asks permission to speak to someone you'd been ignoring, what would that tell you about who you might be overlooking? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story changed how you see the people working quietly in the background, the ones most folks walk right past, hit that like button and subscribe with notifications on, because we bring you stories like this every day. Real people, real strength, no spotlight required. Know someone who's been underestimated far too long? Share this with them. They deserve to be seen. We've got another story waiting for you. Just click the next video. See you tomorrow, same time. Same respect for the people who earned it in silence, here on Graceful Valor Stories.